Thank you. Thanks, guys. Way too nice. Thank you. You know, honestly, this is the first time I've spoken in front of a group of people in months. So thank you for being out here. And if I'm a little rusty on my, speaking skills, you can blame COVID and having a baby, because that'll keep you out of that business for a little bit. But look, it is awesome to see you guys, and it is really incredible. I heard Heath actually, and by the way, Heath, great job, and we deep respect. I remember, I heard him on The Bulwark, Charlie Sykes. Charlie I saw earlier, and he was just talking about, look, there is this sense that we are alone, right? Like, we kind of feel like you watch the news or you look at the internet and you're like, am I the only person that's not nuts? And you aren't. There's others. And I think that's the thing is, as we see, courage is contagious. And I know that I'm coming on the tail end of the conference, and so I recognize that probably some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, you've talked about in some form or another, and others have said some version of it. But I want to talk really briefly, too, about some courage. And, what we see in Ukraine is courage. What we see in many of the leaders that we've heard of, and many of the folks that we saw on January 6th, and many of the folks that we saw between the election and the inauguration that may not have gotten as much, TV coverage as Liz Cheney and I, but actually were way more important to the defense of democracy. And there's probably so many of you in here, but I think of people, of course, like Stephen Richer. I think of Bill Gates, not the billionaire, the one that's probably not worth quite $1 billion, but way more heroic. I think of Al Schmidt. All these folks, Brad Raffensperger, that was on a phone call with the President of the United States, was able to stand strong and say, Mr. President, I just can't lie, right? I voted for you, I supported you, but, I don't lie. I'm not going to, I believe in the principles of democracy. Like, that matters. Because if people like Brad, Stephen, and others don't stand up at that moment, in that pressure, everything that generations have built in this country falls apart. Everything. Because then the other side decides to do it. And then we decide to do it even worse. And then the other side. And this is what ends up happening when you don't have that basic construct. I also think of people like Michael Wood. Ran for Congress in Texas. You guys know him, obviously, and he was up here. I remember when all this was going down, he made his announcement, and he basically, stood in front of a crowd of people or was talking to a reporter and said, I refuse to lie. I'm a conservative. I refuse to lie. And he actually made a comment that for me has always stuck out, and I've probably stolen it unintentionally. But he says, this is what happens when people are abused, when their patriotism is abused. I have no doubt that everybody we talk about, whether you're on the left, right, center, loves the United States of America. Maybe they love it in a little different way, or maybe they think something else should happen, or there's, of course, disagreements on what that means and what the United States should look like and what kind of a society. That's actually what makes us strong. But when leaders come along and they take your love for country and they manipulate you and abuse you, bad things happen. Mike knew that was a tough race. Mike knew it was a long road to win, but he stood anyway. And I'll tell you, that's a brutal process to go through. And I know some of you in here are considering to run for office, and I'll say this. If you're considering to run for office and you know that you have that fortitude to just stand up and do the right thing, and no matter what the result is, be able to look at yourself in the mirror, then go for it. Do it. If you have any doubt, don't. But if you can, do it. I think of Jake Hunsaker in Utah. Is he here? Jake, are you here? Hey, Jake. Making a run for Congress, and I'm supportive of him. He made the decision that telling the truth matters. He made the decision that he's going to stand up for his principles and not lie and not abuse people to get there. You know, actually, when I was planning to come speak, obviously the world became very different in the last 4 or 5 days. And so I've kind of adjusted what I really even wanted to talk about on that basis. You know, it's interesting when you see what's happened in Ukraine, and I think as of even 5 days ago, if we'd have been sitting in this room, there would have been this kind of understanding that darkness is on the march, this understanding that lies are rising and truth is falling, you know, this understanding that division is growing. I think that's how we all felt, and look, I think that's the case still. But something happened 5 days ago when Vladimir Putin made the decision to attack Ukraine, a decision that actually was probably made months before that. We all are talking about Zelensky. When the president of Ukraine made the decision that he's not going to worry for his life, he's going to stay. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, him staying has made the difference between a Ukraine that is on the battlefield today, not only just putting up a fair fight against Russia, but defeating them. That is what happens when somebody stands up and shows what courage is. We have leaders that are sometimes scared to lose their election, or they're scared of a bad news article, or they're scared of being flooded on Twitter. I've been flooded on Twitter. I tweet too much, by the way, I know that. But you know, you look at that and you see what happens when people are put in a position to show strength. You see that when you see people that stand up between Election Day and inauguration and say, I don't care if you protest outside of my house. I will not go into that. You'll see what happens when the president of Ukraine says, I'm staying, just give me more stuff to shoot Russians with. That's what matters. And so when I thought that all this stuff is on the march, I got to tell you, I'm standing in front of you today, and for the first time in a while, I kind of see a little bit of a crack in that evil and in that darkness and in those lies. I got to tell you, this country, no doubt, is at a crossroads. There's no doubt Ukraine is at a crossroads. Ukraine's crossroads is a little more physical, it's a little more obvious, and it's way more violent. But we're at a crossroads in this country. I know you all know this. I knew it too, but there was a day that I kind of had the realization that it wasn't just a crossroads, it was the fight of our lives. I want to tell you a little about that day. That was January 6, 2021. I actually had been paying attention to the Twitter spheres and all the other comments, and I'm like, man, this looks like this might be a violent day. And I also knew what every one of you know instinctively, which is when we want to do democracy, when we want to have self-governance, there is only one basic contract that has to exist. It doesn't have to be agreement on taxes. It doesn't have to be agreement even on voting hours. The one basic contract that has to exist is that if you vote, it will count, and that the vote will be accurate. The counting will be accurate. When you have a leader of the free world that stands in front of America and convinces half the country that the system is broken, that your vote doesn't count. Listen, as patriotic Americans, we can understand why some would say then it is time to overthrow a government by force. If I truly believed that the election system in this country was rigged by Satan-worshiping pedophiles who drink babies' blood, I don't think I'd go peacefully into the night either. Which is why a leader's words matter so much. So going in on January 6th. January 1st, we have a conversation with the House Republicans, and Liz Cheney was speaking. Isn't she amazing, by the way? Yeah, Liz's strength has been an inspiration for me even way before this. She is somebody that I just have nothing but praise for, and as you guys have seen play out. But she was running the House Republican Conference, and at that point, we knew that there was going to be this objection to election certification, but to this point, Kevin McCarthy had not made his position known. Liz goes first. She gives about a 5-minute impassioned speech on this phone call about why we have to certify the election. Kevin McCarthy goes second, and he says, Liz Cheney does not speak for the Republican conference. Didn't give his position yet until a day or two later about him voting against certification. But I remember I was the very first caller to actually ask the questions, 200 of us House Republicans on the call. And the thing I told Kevin McCarthy, and we were friends at this point, I said, Kevin, when you convince Americans that an election is going to be stolen, there's going to be violence. And his answer was, next caller, next question. I didn't know that they would sack the Capitol, but I knew there were a lot of people convinced that the system wasn't working for them. And so I go into work that day. I asked my wife. I used to say I told my wife. I didn't. She has her own agency. I asked her, though, to stay at the apartment. My staff stayed home. And I go in, and it's obviously developing into what it's developing into. And I remember coming off the floor after the opening. I decided not to stay. I was going to watch a little bit of it on C-SPAN. I go to my office. And by the time I get to my office, I'm looking at Capitol Police officers listening to their radios wide-eyed. And I asked one of the Capitol Police officers, I go, is it starting? Is it starting? She just looks at me and she goes, yeah, they're using bear spray. I'm like, oh, wow. Go up to my office, open the window. By this time, the D.C. Metro Police had shown up. Huge heroes, by the way, every one of these people. The D.C. Metro showed up, and I started hearing the non-lethal munitions, and obviously I go on cspan.com, and they have different camera views. I go to Statuary Hall, and at this point, ladies and gentlemen, imagine if there was a security perimeter around this building and that security perimeter was breached. You would now believe that you were vulnerable, and we all were. Because if you can breach a perimeter of the Capitol, the only thing stopping you from having free range of the entire complex is a couple Capitol Police officers at different checkpoints. And if you've just overrun 1,500 of them, if these people knew the plans better, it would have been a very, very different day. If God had not been on our side, it would have been a very, very different day. But I remember calling my wife on the phone, and I just, like disbelief. It reminded me a lot of moments in war. And I just felt something I've only felt maybe twice in my entire life, a dark kind of evil presence. And I'm not one of these people that walks around sensing evil everywhere, okay? But that moment, I just said, this is wrong. This is gross. This is terrible. And of course, after that, everybody said the right thing, and it only took a few weeks for those stars, that idea of power, that idea of adulation and applause to take over. And if we as Republicans would have just simply taken a full accounting for what happened, taken responsibility, we could have moved on. We could have determined nothing like that would ever happen again in the United States, and instead, we try to sweep it under the rug. Well, it's not going to get swept under the rug. The truth is out there, and it's coming out. Because whether or not you or your friends want to know the truth, your kids do. And their kids do. And the next generation does. And Americans in 100 years deserve to know the truth. Because we will not be the first generation in American history that leaves our kids a country worse off than the one we inherited. We refuse to. And we have the ability to refuse to do that. I don't blame the people that came in that day. Now, I got to tell you, of course, I believe they should be arrested. Everybody is responsible for their own actions. But as I said earlier, when you have people that are worshiping politicians, that you have politicians that then use those words, abuse their patriotism, convince them of untruths, we could have expected no different. And people look to Washington, D.C. to say, well, how are you guys going to fix this? Of course, the January 6th committee is extremely important. But how are you going to fix the souls? How are you going to fix the truth-telling? Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, it's not going to come from Washington, D.C. It's going to come from this room and people like you around the country that have had enough. It's going to come from people that have said, you know what, I still believe in what this American dream is. We live in a moment where hope has been squashed in people's minds. We live in a moment where people don't feel like they have opportunity. We live in a moment where people feel like the future is actually more grim than the past. Some of it is from legitimate concerns that we have to be able to focus on instead of focusing on what the latest cultural battle is or how we can own the left or own the right. How can we actually focus on on fixing some of these problems? But the other thing is putting leaders in that no longer have a desire to lie to you to feed their own ego of election. I got to tell you, I'm done with this job in a year, and I'm actually pretty excited about that. I have people sometimes say, like, so sorry you're leaving. I'm like, thanks. I'm not, but thank you. But I got to tell you, I'm not going anywhere. I may be getting out of the house, and I'm excited to leave the house, but I'm actually excited to have way more time to work with all of you to make sure that we take back our political system, because we deserve that. But those generations of Americans deserve it. But they've been told that there's no hope. They've been told that there's no opportunity. They've been told that somebody that doesn't think like you is the enemy. They've been told by a former president that Vladimir Putin is a good guy. I mean, I have no doubt that people feel confused. This is why leadership's so important at this moment. And I want to tell you what's at stake. Because, yes, obviously the future of this country is at stake, and that's important. And honestly, we can debate things like what the tax code is or, any number of issues we deal with in Washington, D.C. that we've debated for 100 years and will hopefully, God willing, debate for another 100 years. We can talk about that stuff. But I've got to tell you, the thing that stands out to me most is what is it that we stand for as a country, and what is the impact on people around the world? We have 360 million Americans. That is my number one priority, to make sure Americans are safe, to make sure they're fed, to make sure they have hope, to make sure the kid in the inner city of Chicago has the same opportunity as a kid born in the wealthiest suburb. I want to make sure that people born in the rural town in Illinois have the same opportunity to succeed as somebody born in the suburb of Illinois. And I actually want to make sure, and I know Principles First does this too, and Country First is doing this as well. And by the way, there's Country First volunteers and members here. Thank you so much. It's been amazing to see that grow. But I want to see groups of people that live in the inner city talk to people that live in the rural town and recognize the fact that the challenges they have are the same. You have drug issues in the inner city. You have drug issues in the rural town. You have unemployment in the inner city. You have unemployment in the rural town. You have broken homes in the inner city, and you have broken homes in the rural town. Why are we not comparing notes? Why are we not aligned? Why are we not looking at things we have in common with people and seeing humanity and coming up with new solutions? That is important for our country. But I have to tell you, what sticks out to me the most at this moment today is the fact that there are billions of people looking to the United States for leadership and desperate for our example. Democracies can live through bad days. Every democracy has a bad day. The question on the strength of a democracy is, how do you come back from those bad days? And that's where we're being tested as a country at this moment. But if you look at the spirit of the people in Ukraine, a country that was divided among itself, a country that had a national identity, but it's never really had to rally around that national identity. By the way, as I was driving in here, there was convoys of people with Ukrainian flags honking their horns. I didn't know what was going on, and then I was pretty excited about it. But when you're attacked by the outside, people come together and they recognize their common humanity. And a former president takes up an AK-47, and a current president takes up an AK-47, and we're all Ukrainians today. It doesn't need to take an external threat to the United States of America. But our mission, and when I say things like, what is our mission? Why is that important? If you look at all the great stuff we have, let's take all the feel-good stuff out of it and just talk about things and money. All the benefits we have as a country is because we've not forgotten our role in the world. At the end of World War II, an entire generation of Americans were war weary. An entire generation of they didn't. And in fact, America doubled down at that moment. And behind the Iron Curtain, the third generation of people born into oppression had had enough of seeing what freedom is and seeing what hope and opportunity is, and they tore down the Iron Curtain. They stood up and said, we demand better. And you see people living in freedom today with opportunity today that never would have had the shot had we forgotten our mission in the world. I think of a time when I went to Kenya. I went as a congressman. They had no idea who I was, but I came in some big black SUV like we always travel in. I get out at this village, and they proceed to tell me the story of how an American kid came up from the University of Illinois and taught this Kenyan village how to care for their cows. They all had cows, how to care for them properly. And I was talking to this specific family that told me, you know, look, our cow used to make, I'm not a farmer, so I'm going to probably get the numbers wrong, but, you know, our cow used to produce just 1 or 2 pints of milk a day. Now it produces 6, 7 pints, enough to feed the family, and we take the excess down to the co-op built by the United States of America, by the way. We sell that for profit, and our life has been changed. And as they're telling me this story, you know, in their land that's about the size of just up here, I look around and there's 50 to 100 other people from the village standing around, wanting to get a look at me. They didn't know who I was, but they didn't know one thing. They knew I was from the United States of America. And they knew that the United States of America changed their life. You're never going to recruit a member of Al-Qaeda or an enemy of the United States out of a place like that. People that can always tell the story of how one kid through USAID came from the University of Illinois and changed their life. That's what this is about. We have to be that example to people in Kenya and every other country that say, is self-governance even possible? If we don't get it right, they're going to say every democracy fails. If we do get it right, they're going to say democracy and self-governance can endure forever, even in difficult times. My grandpa, when he stared down the Nazis in World War II and could never talk about it until I went into the military and went to war, I never understood why. He was willing to give it all. And to some extent, he kind of did. As he was always haunted by what he did over in Europe and what happened over in Europe. We think of the generations from the shot at Concord, to the Civil War, to all the wars in between, to my generation responding after the terrorist attacks on 9/11. And I know many of you in here are veterans as well, and thank you. But every time we are tested, people rise up to defend this place. Right now we're being tested. It may not be an external threat, although they're out there. Right now, the threat testing the United States of America is ourselves. And the question is, will we get sucked into this dark place? Or will we resist? I have to do this every day. There are days I wake up and I just feel consumed by the darkness and I feel angry and I feel defeated, and I'm sure every one of you have those days too, and we need to be honest about that. But when you have those days, it's when you look to God and ask for strength, or look to your family and ask for strength. And you go through and you can throw things at the TV or whatever, but you always come back to the light. You always remember that we don't have a right as Americans to give up on this country. That's not even our right to make that choice, because generations gave us where we are today. And it's a pretty good place, even in all our flaws. It is now on us to carry that torch forward. So 5 days ago, I would have come here and told you that darkness is on the march. I actually think darkness today is on the retreat. When Donald Trump stands up and says Vladimir Putin's a great guy, and then we see who Vladimir Putin is, sometimes the lies have to be shown to the truth. Sometimes the lies and the darkness have to be laid out for display so that the truth can prevail. And as much as I thought lies were on the march 5 days ago, today I actually think the truth is rising up. I really believe people are valuing straight talk and truth-telling. And ultimately, the division that divides us, yeah, that'll always continue to be a problem. But if we can all be Ukrainians, maybe we can all be Americans too. So as we wrap up this weekend, and we wrap up all of you being together and sharing ideas and debating ideas and celebrating our freedom to debate ideas, I just want to personally say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the inspiration that you give me. Look, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that I love doing what I'm doing. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that, taking the stand I have has been fun. It hasn't. But I got to tell you, there are days again when you're down and then you see the people that stand with you, and it is so encouraging and so reinvigorating to realize that there are people. It's like the biblical story of, oh, now you're going to hear my Old Testament history. Ain't that great? The guy that was alone, and then there were thousands with him that God showed him. That is this moment for us today. But we look around and say there are people that know this is wrong, and we're all going to join hands. We're going to unite together. And I think they're going to write history books about what we did. And it may not be charging a mountain or sitting in a foxhole and fighting off an enemy, but it will be fighting off evil, darkness, lies, and the temptation to do things for the moment and not invest in the long-term history of this country. I'm going to tell you, your kids and grandkids yet born, thank you. Thank you very much. God bless you.